Today we're going to make two very similar shoe benches two different ways. One is hardwood and the other is going to be made of 1/2-inch plywood. I want to call them the hard way and the easy way, but I don't really know how accurate that is. The hard one definitely requires more tools and more complex cuts, but the easy one probably requires more thinking ahead and planning. Semantics aside, let's get to work. Both of these projects started out at real lumber, just like pretty much every other project does, getting my materials. So I suppose the easy way here would be just grabbing some plywood. I'm going to be using 1/2-inch Baltic birch, and one sheet will be more than enough for a project like this. And the hard way would be grabbing some hardwood. So picking out boards that work for your project, probably needing to calculate your materials beforehand a bit, and all that good stuff. And in fact, this is a question that I get asked a lot. So I'm going to make a highlighted story on my Instagram page that goes a little bit into my lumber buying history and recommendations. So I won't take up any more time here, but if you're interested in learning more about it, check it out over there. So back in the shop, I could get to work. I started out by assessing my materials to figure out the most efficient way to use it, and then I started milling. First, I needed to get one of the faces nice and flat on my joiner. And you guys have seen me do this in plenty of different videos, but I think it actually came off better on camera here than normal. So I'm going to pause the video for a second and you can see what I'm trying to achieve. So you see how the material is curved? Well, you want to run the pieces where that concave face is down. And the first couple of passes should only be removing material from the ends. Let's back up and watch it again. So when you're doing this, you don't want to push down. You want to let the bend kind of naturally remove itself. And you'll know that you're good when the joiner's cutting across the entire length of the board. Once that was done, I turned my piece on edge and jointed one of the sides. And then I could take everything over to the planer and mill it to a finished thickness of 1 inch. With the plywood version, we're going to be doing almost exactly the opposite. The material comes at a perfect even thickness, so there's no need to mill, but we actually need to make the pieces thicker in this case. Just like with the hardwood version, we're going to be using 1-inch thick pieces, and the plywood is 1/2 of an inch. So we'll rip out a bunch of strips. Some are going to be 1 inch wide, some are 2 inches wide, those will be for the legs, and some will be about 3 inches wide at this point, but they'll get trimmed down later and they'll make the leg stretchers. And we're going to laminate all of these together to make a bunch of pieces that are 1 inch thick. For the hardwood, in terms of ripping, we're doing almost the exact same thing. Cutting out a bunch of 1-inch wide strips for the slats, 2-inch wide strips for the legs, and slightly wider strips that'll be trimmed down later for the stretchers on the leg. So with all of our pieces cut to width and thickness, next we could start refining. I'm going to start with my legs by cross-cutting my 2 pieces into 4, and then setting this rockler crosscut sled to 15 degrees, and using a stop block to create 4 identical legs that'll all lean in at 15 degrees. Okay, back to the plywood bench. This is where this one's going to temporarily jump ahead in complexity for a minute while we make the legs. So I'm going to start pretty much the same way as we did with the hardwood version, cutting out 4 legs that are angled in at 15 degrees. But to build up the joinery, I needed to create a bunch of short pieces to laminate them on. And this will probably be easier to explain with a quick animation. So we have our 4 equal pieces. This is just one of them. Onto the bottom, we're going to laminate 1 short piece. Then we'll use a spacer piece to laminate on a middle piece. And that's going to leave us with the dado that our stretcher will sit in eventually. And that's what the slats are going to sit on top of. Then on top of the middle piece, we'll do the same thing before laminating on a top piece, and that'll complete the leg. Back in the real world, to make this go quicker, I'm just using glue and a finish nailer to hold everything together. So if you wanted to make it a little cleaner or avoid having to fill nail holes, you could just use glue and then clamp them. While we're here, let's also cut out stretcher pieces. And to do that, we're going to tilt our blade to 15 degrees and make a series of rips so that we end up with a stretcher piece shaped like a parallelogram. And then we can cross-cut 4 of them to equal length and assemble the leg pieces. And by now we've sort of leapfrogged the hardwood version, so let's jump back there and play catch up. And here we'll actually start by setting our blade to 15 degrees to make those parallelogram stretchers again. And then in this shot, you can see a little bit more detail about how to make them perfectly sized, which is actually pretty easy. You just make your first cut on one edge, and then use your leg piece to strike a line where the second cut should be to match the width, and then make the cut. Next, I used my stretcher piece to mark out where I'd need to cut some dados into my leg pieces, and then I transferred those marks onto all 4 legs. And once everything was marked out, I used my table saw to make the dados with several passes, stopping as I got close to the limit to check the fit until it was just right. And on these cuts, the thing that you want to be careful of is making sure that you realize that 2 of the legs need to be mirrored versions of the other 2. So you'll tilt your miter gauge 15 degrees one way for 2 of them, and then 15 degrees the other way for the other 2. And if you do it right, you should end up with 8 perfectly sized dados that are really strong structurally and look good to boot. Speaking of boots, let's thank this video's sponsor, Thursday Boots. So whether you're going out on the town for a fancy dinner or working in the shop to build a dinner table, Thursday Boots are right at home. And that's because they live in the sweet spot right between clunky work boots and delicate fashion boots. And because they're direct to consumer and value honest pricing, boots cost about half of what legacy brands charge while maintaining the use of high quality materials and craftsmanship that you'd expect. Now, I've been wearing a pair for a few weeks now, both casually and for work, and actually think that they look better and better the more that they get worn in. And because they're built with Goodyear welt construction, I know that I can get the sole replaced in a few years if I needed to. And Thursday Boots sells brushes and care kits to help keep them polished if I ever decide that I want that new boot look again. So if you're thinking about a new pair of boots, you owe it to yourself to check out Thursday Boots before you go out to the stores. You'll get something as good or nicer and save a little money. And I think it's worth mentioning, if you're looking for gift ideas, they make boots for both men and women. Alright, thanks Thursday Boots. With our leg assemblies done, we could finalize our slats, which will basically involve cutting them to length and cutting in some joinery. And I actually regret doing it the way that I did, so I'm going to go over it and then show you what I should have done to make my life easier, and what I would recommend you do. For the joinery, I left my blade tilted to 15 degrees, and again made a series of passes to create a little dado that would fit over the stretcher of the leg. And this is where I wish that I had done something different. Basically, I wish that instead of putting the dado in the slat piece, I had put it in the stretcher piece. And in case you're having trouble visualizing this, here's a little animation that shows you what I mean. So this is how I did it. And this is how I wish that I had done it. The main reason is, it would just be way easier to cut because you wouldn't have to tilt the blade to make the dado, and the geometry of it all would be a lot easier to solve. So there's less chances for mistake. You could actually make the case that the way that I did it is a superior joint because it's creating a physical lock that holds the stretchers in relation to one another. But honestly, this piece isn't going to be subjected to a whole lot of stress, and I trust that the glue is more than enough for this application. Anyhow, regrets aside, after I glued on the bottom slats, I took more measurements for the top slats, cut in the joinery, and then I could assemble everything. Alright, back to the easy version. Here again, I'm going to cut the slats to length by putting a 15-degree angle on either end, and then I'm going to assemble everything here with no joinery, just glue. And actually, to support my feeling that the joinery I used on the hardwood version was overly complex, I've had this plywood version for about a year now, and the glue's still holding no problem. So whether you decide to build this one the easy way or the hard way, the good news is, no matter what, finishing is going to be simple. At least if you use simple finish. Alright, full disclosure. So this is the finish that Mike Montgomery from Modern Builds, Ben Ueda from Homemade Modern, and I have been developing together, and honestly, I couldn't be happier with it. It gives a really good result, it's all natural, and best of all, it's super simple to apply and basically foolproof. You just wipe it on, let the oil penetrate for about 20 minutes, wipe on another coat, let it absorb again for about 20 minutes, and then wipe off the excess that hasn't absorbed into the wood. The oil penetrates and hardens and leaves a smooth wax top coat for extra protection. So I'll admit that I'm biased since it's kind of my baby, but I really do think that you'll love it as much as I do. And also, if you have used it, comment and tell me what you think about it. We're always looking to improve, and we want and need honest feedback from as many people as we can get. Alright, so there it is. 2 ways to build a shoe bench. I'm still not sure that the easy way and the hard way are the most accurate ways to describe them. I would say that the hardwood version is slightly more advanced in terms of actually fabricating all the pieces, but it actually might be a little bit more simple conceptually. I don't know, who's to say? Easy, hard, simple, complex, advanced. They're all just adjectives. Each is subjective to an individual's talents and situations as the next. Maybe I should just call them my way or the ply way. I'll show myself out. Special thanks to Brandon Savage, David Kleiman, and the rest of my Patreon supporters for making these videos possible. You all are the #1 thing that keeps this show going. Simply put, I couldn't do it without you. And every little bit makes a huge difference. So for everything that you've given me, thank you. Seriously. And if you want to support the show too, check out the Patreon link in the description, see if it's right for you, and as always, no pressure. All right, see you in the next one.